Hello and welcome to the 20th episode of the Ademola Bookmen Podcast. My name's Alistair Bond and I'm with my friend John Coughlin. Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Al. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, bruv. And this week we're doing Clough, the Autobiography. Apologies for the delay in the release of this episode. We've had some technical issues and some international relocation, Johnny.
Moving house, moving country, and losing equipment as I go. So there you go. We're up and running this time, please God.
And please direct any complaints to John Coughlin.
Okay, so Al, I'm kind of prepared to be a little bit in the passenger seat for this one because this is all you, baby.
This is my boy. This is the most significant figure in Nottingham Forest's history.
So, what does Clough mean to you, Al?
I was born in 1977, so basically he's the only football manager I ever knew until I was about 13 or 14 years old. So he really did define the club to me and to generations of supporters.
Is there a statue of Clough?
Yeah, there is in the Market Square in Nottingham. And it's a handsome beast as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's nice.
it's beautiful. Yeah, I took my missus to see it when she visited England. You can imagine her enthusiasm. Did
she weep at the feet of the statue of Brian Clough? I think you told me that you wept at Christ the Redeemer. Was it a similar scene? When she
No, I did. No, I never. My old dear did, but Mum, it wasn't me. I only cry about football, Johnny. Anyway, but so no, there's no tears. Moving away from that subject. But yeah, it is a handsome thing, and yeah, he's, aside from Robin Hood, he's probably the most famous person from Nottingham, whilst not having been from Nottingham.
He shares a trait with Evra in the sense that I think they would both struggle not to be interesting, even if they sat down to write a really anodyne book, I think they would struggle. I don't think they have it in them. They're interesting by nature,
Yeah, I think that's true. And even if you haven't got an interesting story, if you've got an axe to grind, I'm happy to read it. That's always interesting to me.
And he does grind some axes in this book.
Indeed he does. Sometimes with inconsequential little men who really he should just leave behind. Forget about it. You've gone on to great success. But still, I'm thinking of Ernie Ord. So, Clough, the Autobiography. He was born in Middlesbrough in the 1930s, and he has a lot of attitudes, probably are engendered in a lot of people who were born in that similar period. I'd just like to deal with the controversy first, Johnny, before we get on.
Yeah, there's probably a few things that we should talk about.
Famously, Clough was a manager of Justin Fashanu, who was the first player in English football who was not openly gay, but was known to be gay. He was signed as a prospect from Norwich for $1 million. He'd won goal of the season playing for Norwich. He'd been playing for England under 21s, but it went horribly at Forest. And with that came all sorts of unpleasant stories, and we get Clough's reaction to that. And basically, Clough is a homophobe. I'm sure he wasn't alone in that in the time during the game, but nonetheless, he does not cover himself in glory.
Yeah, and Fashanu was clearly a quite troubled individual, and he died shortly afterwards. After this book was written, committed suicide after allegations of sexually assaulting a minor. It all reads terribly, what Clough is saying, and Fashanu himself is, he's quite a tragic figure if you want.
It's just so outdated now. He calls him a puff. He asks why he goes to gay clubs. He uses the signing of a gay footballer as a stick to beat Peter Taylor with. It's all very unedifying and obviously a black mark against Clough's reputation.
Yeah, outmoded attitudes. And Fashanu was living in a world surrounded by those attitudes, I guess, at the time.
It must have been incredibly hostile.
Yeah, there's still no openly gay footballers in the Premier League, but attitudes in society have obviously changed to the point where it's unrecognizable. Now, reading about that now, it is hard in a way to believe that it's not that long ago, really.
No, it's really not that long ago. I mean, you can say that, but there's still no openly gay footballers. I mean, that's nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, it is nuts.
Absolutely
Yeah,
nuts.
it is crazy. But then the other one, and this was every bit as shocking. His attitude to Hillsborough, where Forest one of the teams playing in the FA Cup semi-final when this tragedy struck, resulting in the deaths of 97 Liverpool fans. So Clough was there with his team. Teams were brought off the field, and the Forest team left.
Yeah, there's Clough said he wanted to get out of there. He didn't think he could help anything. He's probably right. Nonetheless, it seems strange. He makes an analogy how he's not a rubbernecker on motorway accidents, so he figured he'd just get out of Hillsborough. But yeah, the whole chapter is a disaster, frankly. I mean, he doesn't need to, but he makes sure that we all know that Clough blames the Liverpool supporters for the tragedy. The whole chapter is just very, very difficult. And as I say, it's unnecessary as well. He makes a special point, and he's like, well, people won't like me for saying this, but I believe the Liverpool supporters were killed by Liverpool supporters. And of course, now we know it, and the Liverpool fans at the time knew it was South Yorkshire Police. It was the opening of the doors which let the people crowd into the football game. So the whole thing is, a real shame.
But the ghostwriter of this book is a Sun journalist, right? Significantly.
Yeah, he is a Sun journalist.
So, as we know, the Sun and Liverpool and Hillsborough, there's a bit of a history there.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine many Liverpool fans read this book. I've never heard a Liverpool fan's reaction to this book, but it would definitely be very, very negative.
What was the Sun headline?
The truth.
The truth, yeah.
Yeah, which is in itself just so sickening.
It's reflective of a broader thing in Clough, in that he loves the police. It's quite strange.
No, he absolutely does love the police, and he appears to have the police at his beck and call. We'll get onto it, but when Nigel is playing for him, it might not even be playing for him. His son Nigel Clough is playing for a team, and one of the opposing players throws a cup of hot tea over him. Clough gets the police involved, gets his old boy down, gets the lad arrested. It's unbelievable.
He got Justin Fashanu arrested as well when there was trouble at the training ground. So yeah, he's a socialist, he says, but I guess he's one of those socialists that likes a bit of police power.
And the Sun newspaper. Yeah.
An early question is, will we be hearing your Clough impression?
Well, now we've got the Hillsborough and the homophobia out the way, I feel more comfortable. I wouldn't really feel comfortable doing a comedy Brian Clough impression while talking about the Hillsborough disaster. Now then, young man, we might hear a bit now and again. No, we're going to have to cut this, Johnny. This is going to be too... We're not going to be hearing the accent, Johnny. We're not going to be hearing the accent.
Yeah, so he was from a council estate in Middlesbrough. There's quite a lot of... maybe kind of like one of those kind of bingo situations where he's going to say the things that you expect an older person to say in a book.
You're not wrong, Johnny. Yeah, chapter 1 is like sentimental drinking games. Bit of national service wouldn't do the youth of today harm. Drink. Kids mucking around on their video games don't know what they're missing. Drink. It's not for me to say, but a mother's place should be in the home. She made a special home for us. Drink. Yeah, he is old-fashioned.
He whines about modern footballers and the amount of money that they were getting. How would he survive in the world today? God love him.
His head would blow up if the thought of signing Raheem Sterling on 300 grand. He just wouldn't be able to deal with it. But yeah, so the first chapter was hard work, frankly. I was regretting the choice of book because he is just so very old-fashioned. Kids today don't realise the thrill you get from ballroom dancing. No, they don't.
I knew that he had a decent football career. He scored 40 goals in 5 seasons in a row. But there's a big but here, isn't there?
Well, all second division goals. I mean,
Yeah.
he's ever so proud of his goal scoring record with justification. He's like, remind Greavesy that he didn't score as many goals as fast as me. But there is a big old asterisk there. It's like Greavesy was scoring them in the top division and you were scoring them in the second division.
He's the Steve Bull of his time to Alan Shearer.
Well, that's a decent comparison, yes.
Yeah.
And one is not as good as the other. Because if he'd been that bloody good, well, why didn't he get a move to a big team, actually? It never really talks about that, does it?
Well,
Sunderland's as big as it gets for him.
there is a thing. It happens later as well, with the exception of when he got the job at Leeds. Clubs just didn't fancy him as a manager, even though he was unbelievable with all of this success. Because I think Clough was not an easy man by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And although there's not much mentioned of him as a player, he must have been a gobby shite, like in the dressing room.
Well, he was an academic, but he was head boy in school. That says something about a person.
Yeah, it certainly does. Headstrong, convinced of his own righteousness. Yeah, he's certainly all of those.
Yeah. I liked when his England career was not a big success, but he did go behind the Iron Curtain with England and room with one Bobby Charlton. And in their spare time, they weren't playing video games, Al. They were bird nesting, which I assume is just looking at birds.
Equivalent, like, right?
The 50s equivalent of Halo.
Yeah, was it throwing rocks at nests? Probably not.
No, it'd be like, oh, there's a jackbird. Jackbird.
Oh, jackbird. Yeah, you're an ornithologist, Johnny.
There's a
jackbird. Chickadee, that's the first bird you can fucking think of. Come on, son. A chickadee. Oh, what's a bird? Jackbird? No, that's a jackdaw, you knobhead. Really, jackbird? Jackbird.
Okay, crow.
It's not so hard, is it? Like a robin redbreast, a thrush. I could keep doing it, John. I can name loads of birds. Anyway, so he's not lobbing stones at he's just admiring them.
Well, I assume so. It'd be a weird thing for him to boast about, that they were like hawking stones at jackdaws, jackbirds' nests.
Well, if my understanding of nests is correct, Johnny, if you even touch one of the eggs, the bird's going to reject it. So you might as well throw a fucking rock at it and make it like Halo. So think on, Cloughy.
But it didn't work out for him, and he wasn't a big success for England. Did he have one cap for England, was it?
I think it was one cap for England. He went very badly. He didn't score, and that was that.
But then when he was 29 years old, just as his England career was about to take off, he got a cruciate ligament injury, and that was the end of it. He was playing for Sunderland, and he was given a job with training the kids. Like, if you get an injury now, obviously, if you're playing for Sunderland now and you get an injury and you're 29, you're probably made up for life, which wasn't always true. But when he was playing, that must have been a terrifying moment in his life.
Well, that's right. I mean, I'm guessing, but I think footballers were just paid regular wages back in those days, right? They wouldn't be any richer than a bank manager or a school teacher.
But he's got moxie. That's one thing you can say for Brian Clough.
Well, you could probably put it like this. Had he not had that injury, he probably wouldn't have gone on to have the managerial career that he went on to have.
Interesting.
He started early. He was sure of himself. He still had something to offer as well. I think going into management, he could show the players literally what he wanted them to do, a la Glenn Hoddle for England. That's not necessarily a great example.
It's not a good example at all.
Anyway, he started young.
And then he went to work for, you mentioned him earlier, Al, one of the most evil men he has ever encountered, Ernie Ord.
He ends a chapter like that. You're ready for it. You're ready for the next chapter whereby Ernie Ord decapitates Brian Clough's wife and steals his children. He does not do that. Ernie Ord does not do that. Ernie Ord tries to instill his son as the media manager of Hartlepools and tries to rein Clough in now and again, like whilst driving a big Rolls Royce.
And is quite small. He seems to hold that against him.
One of the most evil men I will ever encounter. Yeah, one of the most Ernie Ord. So yeah, he cuts his managerial teeth at Hartlepool. He does
Hartlepools. So
Hartlepools.
explain that to me.
I looked it up in Wikipedia, but frankly, it served to only confuse me more because it was two clubs combined. It was like Hartlepool Athletic and Hartlepool Dairy Works or something. And so they were the Hartlepools, but then they dissolved that just to make one Hartlepool.
One Hartlepool to bind them.
You're right, mate.
One Hartlepool to find them, and in the darkness bind them.
Okay. Well, he wasn't bound by Hartlepools for long, was Cloughy, because he got his big break. And we should mention at this point, Peter Taylor. Peter Taylor was a goalkeeper who Clough met whilst playing for Middlesbrough, and became his assistant coach from the point of his managerial beginning.
And I think significantly, he was a Clough flatterer, I think, from the beginning. Oh, you're the best, Brian. You're so much better than Greavesy, Brian.
Well, that spoke to Cloughy, didn't it? And
it did.
You used to be like that with me, Johnny. Not anymore.
But it's very interesting that, like, one of the things that I didn't know about Clough is this tragedy, but this thing about they were an inseparable pair until they were separated, and then they never spoke for the rest of their lives as a result of a falling out. So there's this great sadness around this thing towards, after Taylor dies. But it's funny in the book because Clough is just always having little digs at Taylor throughout the book. And Taylor has died by the time he's written the book.
Yeah, you have to remember who's boss. I mean, so the whole Clough Taylor thing. So, as a managerial duo, Taylor was the talent scout, basically. Taylor would tell Clough who to buy. Clough would then go acquire that player, and there's a lot of stories about that, and then would be that player's manager. And this worked just incredibly well. He's an incredible nose for a player, a real Moneyball attitude as well to acquiring footballers, Peter Taylor, Johnny.
In the sense that he would find the lesser players hiding under a bushel somewhere.
Yeah, older players out of contract, other people have forgotten about.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Young players, other people aren't looking at. So, for example, when they begin at Derby, Taylor identifies Dave Mackay, who's a big player at Spurs. He tells Cloughy to go get him, even though this is for a second division team. And it's against all the odds, Cloughy does get Dave Mackay, and this really is the beginning of Derby's brilliance. Mackay's playing a sweeper behind these other players who they have built to play around Dave Mackay, and they start playing a totally new brand of football. They're passing it out. There's no hoofing it. It's short, clever passing from the back, and this is incredibly successful.
Yeah, and he talks about a particular moment when Mackay put his foot on the ball in a hairy defensive moment and passed it out of defense. And they talk about, like, Taylor and Clough saw this as kind of the dawn of the Derby era.
And what an era, Johnny. This is little old Derby County. You couldn't have a shitter football team. And they won the league. It's an astonishing story how you could get a football team that shit to win the league and to reach the semi-finals of the European Cup.
The big elephant in the room is, despite everything that Clough goes on to do at Nottingham Forest, he really left his heart in Derby, didn't he? Now, tell the truth, Al. I'm not just trying to provoke you here. He does seem to love Derby.
Yeah, this is something that Derby County fans have thrown at Forest supporters for years, that Brian Clough was secretly a Derby fan. having read the book, unmistakably, he remains very fond of Derby County. There's talk of him returning there at points. He lived out the rest of his life in a Derbyshire village, although, come on, that doesn't mean anything. But he does have a soft spot for Derby. He does. It was obviously where he first got his success, and I can imagine that was, special memories for him.
And why does he say repeatedly that at Derby we were going to build a footballing empire to rival that of Manchester United and Liverpool? And why does he not say this about Nottingham Forest, where he went on to greater things? Why is it specific to Derby? And he says it more than once in the book.
I think that's delusion, frankly. If he'd been given the chance to manage Derby for 10 years, somehow they would have built a team like Manchester United or Real Madrid. I mean, that's just obviously nonsense. I just think he's frustrated that he feels he could have done more with that team at that time.
They took over Derby County there in the second division, so in the old second division, and they brought them up and they won the league and they got to the European Cup semi-final against Juventus, and they lost in, Clough would certainly say, controversial and unjust fashion. Is that known to be a factor, or is he just being a bit of a bitter bastard there, do you think?
Well, he describes them as fucking dirty Italian cheating bastards, doesn't he?
So it sounds fairly
I mean, he certainly suggests the referee was dirty. He certainly suggests that. And that's something that he did experience later on in his career at Anderlecht at Forest. Don't get me started.
So there was a German player playing for Juventus who was seen coming and going from the German referees' changing room. Is that the extent of the case he has against them? And just bad decisions, I guess.
I mean, that's it. It's difficult to tell now because we don't have the TV footage that would be used. Certainly, Clough feels he was robbed. But we hear about that in modern times, players going into the referee's room. Maybe they're just being polite.
Yeah, it's quite possible. But at any rate, one thing that is definitely a thread throughout Clough's managerial career is his absolute hatred for the suits, for the people that run football clubs. So the chairman at Derby was a guy called Sam Longston, who was initially very good to Clough, and Clough and him had a kind of, I think he called him was it like father-son or even grandfatherly kind of figure, but it turned sour very quickly, and Clough essentially didn't want anyone tinkering with the football side and was, I would say, extremely territorial. And what Clough says is that chairmen get into football in order to create a profile that they haven't established for themselves in whatever their career was, be they like the guy who owned Brighton when Clough was there was like a nightclub owner. So obviously, suddenly these guys can get fame, and he says that they're often envious of the players, they're envious of the manager. Who am I to say one way or the other? But that's certainly Clough's view, and eventually him and Longston fell out, and Clough and Taylor were really getting tired of him trying to tinker with the football side. So it comes to a head, and actually what happened is they kept, if you want to get a Clough, you go through Taylor, right?
Yeah, it would appear to be that way.
Question Taylor's role. Why is Taylor this? What's Taylor's job, essentially? And they threatened to resigned, thinking that the board would be insane to accept the resignation. But accepted they did, and that was the end of Derby for Clough, although not for Taylor, and more on that and on.
I mean, by this time, Clough was a big television personality as well, and this is part of what annoys him about the Derby chairman, Sam Longston. Sam Longston wanted him to introduce him to people. Oh, I'd like to meet Bobby Moore, etc. But my reading of the book is that Sam Longston seemed perfectly all right, and there just gets a point with Clough where you're just like, I can't take this anymore. There was one occasion, and I forget the player, but they spent $250,000 on him, which again, this is Derby County in the early 70s. This is a substantial sum of money. And Clough just sends Sam Longston a telegram saying, we've bought this really excellent player for $250,000. The club's nearly bankrupt. Enjoy your holiday. Now, no one wants to go on holiday and get telegrams like that. It's just, it's not even a text message where you text him back quickly going, what the fuck have you done? It's like, oh, now I've got to get to my old telegram shop, whatever you call those, and dictate a telegram going, what the fuck have you done? Stop. So I can understand why these chairmen get sick of Clough. And I think you get to a point where it's like, well, we still have the same players. So, we'll just get a new guy to keep doing what they do. And they do, actually. Dave Mackay comes in and wins the league again with that same group of players.
Mm.
And once again, I mean, you're not going to keep a team like Derby at the pinnacle for very long because shit will sink down to the bottom.
Why is it at this point in his life that he's going to Brighton? Now, Brighton are obviously big now, but they weren't then. He just won the league with Derby County. It's remarkable.
I mean, I've got to think again, Johnny, that maybe other chairmen and the like were reluctant to employ him despite the potential success. You're going to be getting it in your neck day and night. A lot of people back then, you probably just appreciate the status quo rather than having, without wanting to use a horrible modern word, a disruptor like that, just tearing shit up, telling everyone that you're a fucking idiot and that he's right. Just give me more money. It must have been. I can understand how it happened.
He does say some insane things in the book. He talks about skipping queues and not filling up his own car at petrol stations because he couldn't be bothered and other to get someone else to do it.
And he says at the end of that little anecdote about getting other people, he's like, I bet you're jealous, aren't you? No, no, I'm going to put my own petrol in.
Yeah, well, whatever the reason, a year after losing in the semi-finals of the European Cup to Juventus, they were losing 4-0 to amateur Walton and Hersham in the FA Cup, followed by an 8-2 loss to Bristol Rovers. So it was quite a fall.
I mean, it just simply doesn't happen now. This is like Thomas Tuchel going from Chelsea to
Colchester or something, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. But it doesn't last long, does it, Brighton? Because it was never going to.
Yeah, and so at this point, he is offered a big job. And look what happens.
Yeah, so now comes the famous 44 days at Leeds United. So crucially, and probably the reason why it didn't succeed or it failed so quickly was Peter Taylor stayed behind at Brighton. And Clough moans that Peter Taylor left him. But of course, Brian Clough left Peter Taylor in the job he was doing and went to Leeds. Now, I can understand Peter Taylor wanted to take the Brighton job on his own, but equally, you can't really complain about him staying there when he's just moved house all the way down there. So the whole Leeds United thing, an absolute clusterfuck from beginning to end, eh? He immediately alienates all the players, immediately, by telling them that all their trophies were worthless because they won it by cheating. Oh, mate. I wonder if, honestly, if he searched in his heart of hearts, would he do all of that again differently?
Well, he so obviously got it so wrong here. He is an egomaniac, and I would say probably a bully. And he was trying to show that he was the boss and that he wasn't impressed. They'd want to get in line with him. And they were essentially like, no, sorry, not for me.
No, not for me. Because how can you tell the best team in the land that they're not the best team in the land? They are. And I can understand how that would have got all of their backs up immediately.
But can you imagine the balls that it took to go in to say that he's hard man? Well, you're fucking terrible.
And again, I can't think of anyone harder than the Leeds United football team from the 70s. Just, I wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of all those lads. So, it took some brass balls, but man, he was misguided there.
This, as you said, this is famous because there's the book about it, the Damned United, 44 days at Leeds. But it's just part of the legend, really. Had that been the end for Clough, how would Clough be remembered now? Won the league with Derby. Wow, very impressive. But would I have ever heard of him?
No, you wouldn't know. He would have been a footnote.
And of course, there's all that really fun stuff with Revy on the television together.
But that was the very same day he'd been sacked. Is that right?
Yeah, I
He,
think so.
I mean,
And he didn't know
that
Revy was going to be there.
it is astonishing. I mean, to be there. I mean, anyone, if you've ever been sacked, it's a horrible feeling. Even if you didn't like the job, even if you wanted to leave, it's still horrible to be rejected like that. And then to have to face down the fella whose job you took, who performed that job to the very highest caliber, and then to look him in the eye and condescend him and patronize him like that. Oh, Cloughie,
Yeah,
absolute gold. The man, yeah.
that obviously sounds one way now, but at the if you were watching that at the time, maybe you would have thought this guy is absolutely deluded.
Well, it would be David Moyes looking at Ferguson, telling him what a bad job he'd done and how he was trying to do it better. You do understand that, don't you? I mean, that's the comparison, isn't it? It's like David Moyes if it had gone even worse. And yeah, he'd just gone into a TV studio and stared down Alex Ferguson.
Yeah, well, that wasn't happening, was it?
Well, not with those two, but that's just the mark of Clough, isn't it?
Yeah,
Absolutely bulletproof, or at
yeah,
least it seemed to be.
yeah, yeah. So okay, off he goes to Nottingham Forest. So he finds,
Yay! Let's get on to it.
yeah, he finds another shit club down on its luck.
Yeah, so Forest weren't the high-flying team that Premier League fans will recognise now. No, back then we were second division and very mediocre too. And Cloughie came in. So he had a season and a half in the second division, gets promoted, wins the title over Liverpool, who at that time were European champions, then goes on, gets Liverpool in the first round of the European Cup, eliminates them and wins the European Cup, and then the next season retains the European Cup. This is unprecedented stuff. And it will never, ever, ever happen again.
Yeah,
Unless money is... No, it will never happen again. There's no way this can ever happen again.
so if tomorrow, say, some state buys
Sheffield Wednesday.
Sheffield Wednesday, like it would be impossible because of the financial
PSR and the
yeah,
financing. Yeah, it
just
simply
wouldn't,
will never happen again.
and that would be also fake.
Absolutely. It wouldn't be the organic. It wouldn't be the genius of the manager. It would be the
Right.
money.
I think your claim is correct. So do you remember it?
No.
How old are you?
So yeah, I was like 1 and a bit and 2 and a bit when we won our European Cups.
There was one thing I did want to ask you, but if I think about the great Liverpool teams, the great United teams of those eras and earlier, I would have been able to name players. Trevor Francis, I guess, is somebody I would know. Martin O'Neill is someone I would know, but that's mostly, I think, because of they both went on to manage. And in the case of O'Neill, he managed Ireland. But these Forest players are not names that really resonated with me. Some of them were familiar, yeah, but
No, you're absolutely right, Johnny. They're not. None of them were household names. And although they had decent careers, none of them were like international stars for a long period, with the exception of a keeper. Obviously, Peter Shilton.
yeah,
Cloughie
Shilton, okay.
absolutely loves. But yeah, the rest were journeymen, right? Journeymen and kids.
What is it, do you think? What was the secret elixir that Clough was pouring into their pints?
Well, I think they did exactly what Clough wanted. I think the team spirit, the team bonding was huge. And I think that was all part of being a team back in the day. It was, you really did have to go out and get pissed together, right, to be a decent football team back in the 70s
It's
and 80s.
certainly how Clough describes it. That
I
they,
mean, did they do that on the continent? No. Right?
no,
Did they?
yeah, maybe they did.
70s Fiorentina go out and get smashed on wine.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe in the 70s and 80s, maybe they were smashed all the time.
Well, maybe they were.
Well, Maradona was.
Well, that's true. Yeah, they probably all were, right? We always sort of beat ourselves up. Like, no one drinks like we drink, but everyone loves booze.
You know, because Clough, he is a kind chronicler of the life of Brian Clough, I think, and he certainly wants us to believe that he was tactically just streets ahead of everyone else. So what was it that he was doing tactically that was so innovative or new or different?
Well, there weren't tactics. I mean, he was famously suspicious of tactics. It was all a question of your team. He wanted you to play. I guess a modern equivalent would be Postecoglou at Spurs. It's just play your game. Play your game. Always believe in yourself. Play your game. If there's a pass, make that pass.
But to be suspicious and to refute tactics more broadly is in itself a tactical decision. So I guess that was a tactical decision then.
Yeah, I imagine it was. But I mean, he really was suspicious of tactics. But equally, I'm not sure how much time he spent on the training ground with the players. I think he was more of a Saturday manager come in, gives a rousing speech
Right.
kind of guy.
And it was Taylor was the man on the training ground, was it?
No, I think Peter Taylor was off like smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee. I think he had his coaches for all that.
Yeah, okay. There are nice Taylor stories, actually. Remember, he tells a nice story. Was it when they were at Forest and Taylor says, we're going to bring the players to Scarborough. Now, my English geography is not great. Where is Scarborough in relation to Nottingham?
It's a good 2.5 hours from Nottingham, north-east.
And Clough was like, okay. So off they went, and then they came back, and Clough asked the bus driver, how did you get? So it's interesting that he asked the bus driver. He obviously knew something was up. How did you get on in Scarborough? Yeah, good. Although we had a hard time getting the wardrobe out of the bus. He'd used the team to move furniture to an apartment he bought for himself in Scarborough. Bravo, Peter Taylor.
Yeah, very well done. You wouldn't get away with that now, would you? And whilst we're on anecdotes, there was a nice one. Brian Clough called the youth dressing room and says, someone get me a cup of tea. And the youth on the end of the line goes, get it yourself. And Clough goes, do you know who this is? And the kid on the other end of the line goes, yes. Do you know who this is? And Brian Clough goes, not sure. He says, well, get the fucking tea yourself. Lovely stuff.
That is very nice.
There's a nice aside, a softer side of Clough, which he uses that anecdote actually as an example of him not being a tyrant.
So Robert Maxwell, father of Ghislaine Maxwell, he was on the board. He was chairman of Forest.
No, chairman of Derby. He wanted to be chairman of Derby. How dare you think that disgusting animal would be associated with Nottingham Forest football team? So he is very much a Derby man, sir. Yeah, I mean, in the early 80s, because of a connection with Ghislaine, like Jeffrey Epstein was a season ticket holder at Derby County. That's not.
He's making that up. Nice.
Yeah.
But so Maxwell was thrown off his boat, potentially by the Mossad. And I had read elsewhere, like years ago, that he may have been like an Israeli intelligence asset. You know, it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, Maxwell, no kidding.
Yeah.
I remember him dying. That was in mid-late 80s, wasn't it? I do remember that.
Did he own Maxwell House? The coffee?
I don't think so. But he did own Maxwell, the footballer, friend of Zlatan. He was named in honour of Robert Maxwell. No, he owned the Mirror, right? He owned the Mirror.
And
the Mirror newspaper.
And then he screwed everyone for their pensions or something?
Stole the pensions.
Yeah, okay.
Don't put that on bloody Forest, mate. Nothing to do with us.
So the reason this comes up is because the Derby board tried to get Clough back. And this I really found unbelievable in the truest sense, that I could barely believe that this sequence of events happened. So Taylor they're having this unbridled success. Does that even make sense? Like, they're just having so much success at Forest. And then at the same time, Taylor, for whatever reason, is secretly talking to the Derby board. And he essentially tells them, yeah, we'll come back. But Clough is saying, look, I'm not going back. And Derby's like, just set up a press conference. And by the time he comes over, he'll just go with it. It's like, what the heck? And Clough comes over, the press conference is there, and he's like, no, I'm not doing it. And Clough says, okay, I'll go into the press conference. And he goes out there and explains it to the press. Like, that's an astonishing series of events.
Well, it's good to have a press conference and something it's not happening. Like, you give him 100 a day, like, well, Jurgen Klopp, he just had to do one daily, just a day. I will not be managing Real Madrid. I will not be managing Barcelona. The same goes for Juventus. I will not be managing Germany. Yeah, ballsy. If you build it, they will come, right?
Yeah, well, is this where the rot set in with Taylor?
Well, this is the beginning. I mean, you say that Cloughie's a Derby fan. It seems like Taylor is the Derby fan, right? Taylor's always itching to get back to Derby.
And he does go back at this point, right?
Well, this is the thing, Johnny. It's funny because he was only at Forest for 6 or 7 years, Peter Taylor. But obviously, those were the years we won the European Cup in the league, so they were the best years.
Significant enough period of time. But so they fell out over Taylor. Then tried to sign Archie Gemmill.
Well, he did sign Archie Gemmill. He signed Archie Gemmill,
and he didn't
let Clough know that he was doing it.
And that's it. I'm never speaking to you ever again.
Yeah, so Clough saw that, and he saw a friendship of 15 years, and he just fucked it off. And it smells of regret in the book. He knows he did wrong, doesn't he, Johnny? He knows he did.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because he knows he did wrong. He's written the book after Taylor has died. He's written the book after his own exit from Forest was a real kind of disastrous end for him. And it's also a time when he's kind of dealing with alcohol and his descent into alcoholism. So there is a pile of regret in the book generally. However, he does say that Taylor reached out to him loads of times, and he essentially just kept rejecting him.
Well, I think this is the dichotomy of the man, Johnny, is the pig-headedness. It's the arrogance which made him a fabulous football coach. But it's the same pig-headedness and arrogance which ultimately led to his downfall. No one could tell him he drank too much, because how would anybody tell Brian Clough that he drank too much? He lost his closest ally in football in Peter Taylor, so he had no one to tell him he was wrong anymore. He just had lackeys and lickspittles. And towards the end, anyone could have said, Brian, this isn't working. You've got to just change it a little bit. And Forest could have been saved in that last season with just a little bit of extra input. It was so obvious to problems. But by then, I think Clough's arrogance and pig-headedness just meant nobody else could have a say. And it was his way. And ultimately, that led to his downfall.
Yeah, there's a nice anecdote. And I think it sums up the Taylor Clough dynamic as I now understand it well. They were at some event and Princess Margaret was there. And Taylor says to Clough, go and tell her we won the European Cup. And Clough was like, why would I tell Princess Margaret that? She won't be impressed. It's like, just go and tell her we won the European Cup. And he kept at him. So Clough goes over and tells her that they won the European Cup. She wasn't very impressed.
No. Yeah, and he says, go and tell her she'll like it. I just think that's ever so nice, she'll like it. But yeah, basically, it seems to me Peter Taylor could tell Brian Clough to do anything he liked, and Clough sort of saw it as a challenge, and he'd go and do it.
Yeah, the dynamic.
I don't think Peter Taylor ever negotiated his own salary ever, right? He just got Cloughie to go in and do it every time.
And Clough is always saying that Taylor loved the pound. Is that what he says?
Yeah, loved the pound note.
Loved the pound note.
But I believe you had a few pound notes in some brown paper bags as well, didn't you, Brian? You liked them too.
Yeah, he did. The thing on the Taylor Clough dynamic is it doesn't really exist elsewhere in football. There are literally no other examples of successful managerial duos, not at that level anyway, right?
I think you're right. I think maybe it's not as pronounced. I wonder if Eddie Howe went on to win the European Cup with Newcastle, people will be speaking about Jason Tindall in hushed tones, the Tindall stand at St James's Park. I mean, Clough went on to have another 7 or 8 good years at Forest without Taylor. We won a couple of League Cups. There was the FA Cup final appearance, which was for one trophy which evaded Clough. I mean, he signed some great players subsequent to Taylor, your Stuart Pearces, your Neil Webbs, but it was never that same level of success, never like winning leagues or like massive European trophies. I was at that game, Johnny. I was at that cup final.
Oh, how old were you?
91, 13,
Oh,
13.
those things hurt so bad when you're young.
Well, let me add a bit of colour, Johnny. The tickets were acquired for us by my uncle, and he had a connection at Millwall, which meant we were at the Spurs end. And I had all my finery on, as you can imagine, like decked head to foot in Nottingham Forest stuff. And I got spat on by a Spurs fan. Happy memory. And I also let out an illicit cheer when Gazza got stretched off, and like I got pelters. My old man was like hacking in. I don't really remember much about it. I remember being very upset, and in all fairness, I remember all the Spurs fans around me being kind at the end. But it's easy to be kind when you've won, isn't it? Yeah, the one that got away. But yeah, that was Clough's great sadness. He really deeply wanted to win the FA Cup.
And he really deeply wanted to be England manager. It's funny and this is like, we talked about regrets in the book. It's kind of a human thing, maybe, that people remember regrets maybe in a way more than successes. To come away from that book where he's done these amazing things and think, geez, that guy has a lot of regrets. It's funny, isn't it?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's it. I mean, wish I had a success to blot out any of my regrets, but regrettably, no. He was never going to be England manager, was he? Having read the book, I understand it more than ever. It was always a weird one for me because he was always talked about as the potential England manager when I was a kid, but obviously I didn't want him to be England manager because I wanted him to be Forest manager. So I was happy he didn't get that. But he was just too controversial. Can you imagine that there's a paragraph in that chapter where he says, what the English FA didn't recognise is that I would have completely changed the way I was if I'd been England manager. And it's like, oh, those bloody FA bigwigs. They didn't recognise I would have completely changed my character if I'd been England manager. It's like, you probably wouldn't have in reality.
No.
Oh, by the way, one of the England FA bigwigs, his name was Dick Ragg. I go by Richard, actually. I go by Richard Ragg.
Richard Ragg is quite good. Dick Ragg.
Richard Ragg's fine, but Dick Ragg is what you need after you've had a wank. It always blows my mind that anyone goes by the name Dick. You know what I mean? Like, when I was a kid, it's like, his name's not actually, no, his name's Richard. But you know what Dick means, right? I thought like all these adults didn't know that their name was secretly the name for a penis. Like, I genuinely, it's like, why would you do that? Why?
On one of those awful American talk shows, and maybe it was Kimmel, and Kimmel's not the worst. He did a thing where it was people with funny names for their professions, and there was a fella who did what do you call it when you get the snip?
Circumcision.
A fellow who did circumcisions, and his name was, this was true, Big Chop.
See?
Oh my
Dr.
God.
Richard Chop, welcome, sir. Dr. Tit Chop, get the fuck away, pervert. I got my medical marijuana card, Johnny, and my doctor was called Dr. Blunt. And I looked his name up, and his name was actually Blount. He did a James Blunt thing, but of course he did. Dr. Blunt, so good.
He hit the bottle pretty hard, it seems, and they were relegated in his last season. He had said it would be his last season. He says that he should have stepped down after they lost the FA Cup final. Discuss, Al.
Well, that's probably the tragedy, isn't it? Because probably if they had won the FA Cup final, he would have stepped down, right? It would have been perfect. The last trophy he hadn't won, he could walk away. Forest had a good team at that time, but unfortunately that got dismantled. Famously, Forest needed a striker in that season. We got relegated. We were meant to get Kevin Gallagher. We got big fat Bob Rosario, and that was that, basically.
But you turned down Collymore.
Yeah, he could have got Collymore again. This is one of the tragedies. We got one win, decided to hold off paying 2 million for Collymore from Southend. And if we got him, yeah, we would have been fine because that kid was magic.
Yeah, that's crazy now, isn't it? It's funny that Clough, you were saying earlier that he wouldn't have been able to manage now because of the money, but it's funny that he was so reluctant to spend other people's money. You think you wouldn't care less, like?
There's a part of me that thinks, so Johnny, in all of this, some of it was all kickback related? If that
Mm,
Collymore deal had been a nice brown paper bag, this is unfair, but there definitely were kickbacks in transfers those days. I don't know if that went on to the 90s. But yeah, it's a bloody shame he didn't buy Collymore because I can't help but think how different all of Forest's subsequent history would have been like. We fell off the gravy train on the first season
yeah,
and we got back, but we never really managed to get a proper foothold in there.
yeah. I have a friend whose great great grandfather or whatever got on the Titanic when it left from,
Southampton.
and it stopped in Cove, and he got off.
He got off.
Yeah, but anyway, whatever. I suppose the Forest going out in the first year of the Premier League is like they're like the opposite of that.
Come to the Ademola Bookmen Podcast for all your finest analogies. Well, I've been to Cove, Johnny, and I talked about Roy Keane there because he used to play for Cove Ramblers, so it all ties in.
Yeah,
Lovely.
exactly. It's all very deliberate.
Oh, brilliant, Johnny. Brilliant. That's your mastery of this art.
So tell me how you remember those final days. You were a teenager. You're masturbating into your dick rash.
I mean, I remember I wasn't going to those games. I think I probably saw no more than 3 or 4 of those last season games. So I don't really remember it that much. But I do remember his last game, Sheffield United, the whole ground singing one Brian Clough. I mean, that's pretty special. I remember he was crying, eh? He had tears in his eyes at the end.
Yeah, I remember that as well.
I mean, if you're gonna go out, well, no, don't get fucking Forest relegated, but but it was in a tragic way beautiful, right? No.
Yeah, well, there is something to that. It's not a fair, fitting ending, but it's a heck of an ending.
It is a heck of an ending, and there's some poetry to it. He took us from second division, and
And
he
took you
left
right
us
back
in the
down
second
there.
division. But yeah, man, what an 18 years it was in between, though, like, or 15 years, or however long it was.
And what about when he smacked those when he smacked those fans? That was kind of
Well, let's
fun,
talk about
wasn't
this. This is much more fun, eh? Yeah. I wasn't at that game, but I remember hearing about it on Radio One News the next morning, and it's like, and in Nottingham, and my little ears pricked. I was, what's happened? What's happened? Because you didn't know then. There's no internet. Could have been some horrible tragedy, but it was yeah, Cloughie whacked a few pitch invaders. He says he wasn't the worst for. I wasn't the worst for drink because then I would have missed. You were the worst for drink, Brian, because otherwise you wouldn't have done it. It's the easy worst. And in all fairness, that there was of the 3 fans he hit, 2 forgave him like immediately, and there was a lovely press conference. It's
Yeah.
like, give us a kiss.
You have to catch me, is it?
Lovely, chase me,
Chase me.
chase me. So good.
Well, that's kind of it, really, for Clough, isn't it? He died in 2004, I think. Did he do anything in those last 10 years after football?
No, he did absolutely nothing.
Really?
No, he did
No
nothing.
TV or nothing?
No, he just disappeared. He just absolutely disappeared.
Into
Like, he
the,
didn't come back. He came back to a Forest game or something. He went to a county game because Nigel was a manager by then. Nigel will never be a manager. It says that in the book. He's been a manager for like 25 years now.
Yeah.
And Stuart Pearce will always be at Nottingham Forest. Wrong again.
He didn't love Pierce.
So yeah, he did have a funny relationship with Stuart Pearce. There's a famous story told by Mark Crossley whereby Stuart Pearce had to go off with the England squad, but the rest of the Forest squad was still left training with Cloughy. And this angered Cloughy, like that somehow, because he'd been picked for England, Stuart Pearce would think he was better. So when he comes back from training, comes back from the England squad. Cloughy brings in an iron, and he points at the match pro and goes, "What's this here, Pierce?" Basically put a little advert in the match programme for his electrician's business, which he did with his brother. So Cloughy's like, "An electrician, are you? Well, look here, here's my Barbara's iron. I want it fixed by Friday. And if it's not fixed by Friday, you don't play." And they all the team are like, "Well, what the fuck is this? It's not his fault he got picked for England." But sure enough, come Friday, Stuart Pearce wanders in with Barbara's iron, mended, lovely stuff, and he played on the Saturday.
God, that's daunting, isn't it?
I mean, Stuart Pearce, tough guy, right? I mean, it'd be difficult to shout at, but yeah, it's very impressive.
It's just the psychology of it, isn't it? It's like it's warped, is what it is.
And it's not planned psychology, is it? He's just doing all this on the fly, but these things seem to work more often than they didn't.
He also doesn't like Martin O'Neill. Says he was a bit of a snake. And
he also threw Gary Birtles off a coach for moaning.
That was brilliant, wasn't it?
I can tell you this. If Brian Clough lived in 90s America and got the NBC feed, my God, Gary Birtles is the co-com. All he ever does is moan. He's awful. They put him on Forest games, and it's the worst thing in the world.
But that's it, really, isn't it? There's not much else. Have you got any other little stories now?
No. But I'm happy to tell you, in some amazingly joined up thinking from the Ademola Bookmen podcast, our next episode will be the biography of who?
Peter Taylor.
Yes, indeed. Look at that. Look at the quality we're bringing you there, folks.
What's it called? With Clough?
With Clough.
Yeah.
So there's a man absolutely defined by Brian Clough, but even in his autobiography, it's about Brian.
But okay, let's rate this book.
What are the criteria by you want to rate this book, Johnny?
Yeah, I'll give it 4. I give it 4 boxed fans.
Yeah, okay. I too will give it 4 boxed fans. It's an excellent book. It's a real insight into his psychology. It's a real insight into his prejudices and the ugliness. But it's real, isn't it? I think you really do get a pretty decent reflection of who Brian Clough is, maybe without his worst excesses. But I think you can read between the lines.
This is fairly unvarnished stuff, I think I think a book written in the 90s is likely to be less guarded than a book written today. And I think that you see that here.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, absolutely right. No matter how much you like his opinions on Hillsborough, they were his opinions and he put them. That wasn't someone at the an editor saying, "Let's just cut all this out." You got the real Brian Clough and his real viewpoints, for better or for worse.
For better or for worse, yeah, absolutely. Well, okay. That's it.
All right, then. Well, hopefully that's recorded.
Yeah.
And, well, thank you very much for this delay, joining us for this delayed episode of the Ademola Bookmen Podcast. Episode 21, as previously mentioned, will be With Clough by Peter Taylor. Please reach out to us and send us a comment on Instagram on the Ademola Bookmen Pod.
Yeah, well, thanks, Al. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Johnny. Thank you. And we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thanks for listening, folks.
Thank you indeed.
Let your body spin like there is nothing in life.